Thank you all. Ah, it's almost overwhelming seeing all your faces on here. I'm much closer than usual, so you may even be able to see mine dimly. Um, I guess I just think what an amazing thing to do for somebody to come and be willing to sit and listen to their story. So yeah, heartfelt thanks. Thank you. I hope you'll be able to follow me. I was just saying to Ingan and Rebecca, I've written about 100 pages over the last few days, most of which have ended up in the Rayburn. So, hello, Ingan. Sorry, Ilya. I hope I hope my reading most of it won't lead to something a bit stilted, but I'll find out. Okay. So, heard this morning with joyful agreement the words of Norman Fisher. The Buddha Dharma to me is like the earth speaking. So, beginning, under the rose apple tree. After the future Buddha had pursued years of ascetic training and sacrifice, he was still not enlightened. He asked himself whether there might not be a better way. Immediately, he had the memory of sitting as a child under the shade of a rose apple tree, watching a ploughing ceremony his father was participating in. He remembered the relaxed joy and communion his younger self felt with the world around him, and immediately knew this was the way to enlightenment, back to that simple childhood awareness. Before the first words came, there were night skies, summer dust, sun on the waves. There were images, visions, openings, knowings. Like bright stars, their light shines undimmed still through time, connecting with an unshakable faith in the rightness of things. What follows is a try at mapping a journey with no discernible beginning, middle, or end. No clear way-marked path, follow the signs and you'll arrive at your destination. More like a retrospective dot to dot, tracing lines that connect one bright star to another, to gradually reveal the shape and pattern of a life, perhaps like Andromeda appearing in the night sky. Earliest memories between the ages of 3 and 4 years in Rosniger, a small Welsh village on the island of Anglesey. Out in the lane, alone in the quiet dawn, the early sun breaking through clouds, the feeling of profound and complete happiness, my life seamless with the sky and breeze, a direct knowing of the rightness of things. Second memory, the first memory of words appearing in my mind. At the end of the lane, an old Welsh Methodist chapel. Alone in the empty hall, the smell of polished wooden pews, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, dust motes in the shafts of light. Suddenly, a roar that cracked the silence and shook the building, combined with the sunlight, in the sudden realization, and actually in the words, "This is God." Terror turned to awe. Of course, the roaring was the roaring of the jets from the nearby Barrier station there. The early years, the world of life opening up, of solitary wandering in Redburn woods, the rust puddles and the endless perfection of bluebells, hiding in tree roots, searching for fairies, the smell of damp leaves and golden afternoons stretching forever, free and timeless. A memory from my 6th year. One summer morning, I had walked to school as usual, carrying my mother's lunch. On arriving at the school gate, it suddenly occurred to me not to go to school at all, but instead to walk to a cornfield nearby and have my packed lunch as a picnic. I remember lying on the earth, hidden by the golden corn, the day stretching around me for what must have been hours, only returning home in the afternoon to find that the school had called the police, who had been searching for me all morning. Somehow I knew then that my mother's anger was also her concern and love for me. Later on in my 40s, I discovered Thomas Traherne's mystical poem, Dies Natalis. The corn was orient and immortal wheat, which never should be reaped, nor was ever sown. I thought it had stood from everlasting to everlasting. The green trees, when I saw them first, transported and ravished me. Their sweetness and an unusual beauty made my heart to leap, and almost mad with ecstasy. They were such strange and wonderful things. Soon there were books. I learned to read quickly, beckoned by the promise of delight in the worlds opened by the words, like passing through a secret door into undiscovered realms, roaming as freely inside my imagination as I had outside in the woods and lanes. Thresholds, portals, parallel worlds. Between 6 and 7 years of age, there appeared dreams, recurring over months and years. The one I remember most vividly was of a summer evening landscape, green hills and wooded streams stretching to the sea and beyond. Somewhere at the border of this beautiful place was a portal, a door, invisible, not always open. When it was, I could walk through it and find I was in exactly the same landscape, all the details identical, and at the same time, I knew a threshold had been crossed, and though it was apparently the same, it was simultaneously utterly different, of a different order. The landscape through the door was redolent with possibility. In some sense, the normal limitations of perception disappeared and were replaced by a numinous, limitless quality. I had loved Lewis Carroll's stories of Alice in Wonderland, but particularly Alice Through the Looking Glass. I reread them year after year. No doubt this story and its themes of parallel worlds, which in some ways I thought of as the harmony of sameness and difference, fed the well streams of my young dreams and reveries. Lewis Carroll wrote, "Once through the looking glass, Alice began looking about and noticed that what could be seen from the old room was quite common and uninteresting, but that all the rest was as different as possible. For instance, the pictures on the wall next to the fire seemed to be all alive." The dream of the two parallel worlds of hills and valleys, woodland and distant vistas of the sea, always carried with it a flavour of mystery, of unspeakable joy and beauty at passing through the portal, such that my waking hours were frequently dogged by a kind of painful longing, a longing to find the secret door, the way in. Many years later, I was delighted to hear the words by Leonard Cohen, "You lose your grip and then you slip into the masterpiece." Whether it was H.G. Wells's green door into the elusive garden of delight he searched for all his adult life, or C.S. Lewis's wood between the worlds, the longing set up residence in my heart and sometimes made it hard to endure what felt to be the dusty, unanimated side of the day-to-day world. And I would search for the portal, knowing that I could not contrive to slip into the masterpiece. It was always a joyful accident. Then there was hymn singing at school assembly and Sunday school. Daisies are our silver, buttercups are gold. Hills of the north rejoice. See the farmer sow his seed up the field and down. There is a green hill far away as the waters cover the sea. Though the hymn spoke of God and Jesus, it was singing for the beauty of the earth which filled me with joy and a love for both the wild world and the cultivated gardens of my childhood. Surely God was not elsewhere than in the yellow Easter daffodils, or even the compost heap at the bottom of the garden. In the Gospel accounts of the Passion, my young heart picked up the deep significance of the part human ignorance played in this powerful story, and knew in some inchoate way that compassion was ultimately primary, if that makes sense. The Christian story of the resurrection continued to resonate deeply with the sense that the nature of life was beyond everyday understanding, and at an unutterable level I had already been shown this. So returning to the story of the boy Gautama under the shade of the rose apple tree, I'm grateful to my parents that they were able to give me such a long leash, that I was as free to roam as widely and wildly in the world of fields and woodlands as in the imaginative worlds of books and stories, and increasingly in dance and music. It only occurred to me in later life that sometimes this freedom was also felt by my young body and heart to be lacking protection. There were shocks, ruptures, and rents in the fabric of my world which could not easily be patched over by forgetting or distraction. The sudden knowledge at 6 years of age of the fact of death. This surfaced for weeks or months in bed at night. For the first time, I realized that even adults could not protect themselves or me from this. My father would reassure me that he and my mother wouldn't die for a long time yet, but his promise rang hollow, and I knew I was on my own with this shadowy spectre, which would appear when it was time to ascend the stairs to bed at night on my own. The first time in that same year, my mother lost her temper with me, her blow to my body sending me reeling into the kitchen cupboard and making my nose bleed. My world cracked. For the first time, I had to accommodate the fact that someone who loved me could also cause grievous hurt, and there was nothing at all to be done about it, not even being good. Then Christine Beck, a 9-year-old girl in my class and my next door neighbour, was murdered by a group of young soldiers. This could not be reconciled with trust in the care of adults. Dark terrors met me at any and all times of the day or night, on the stairs to bed, alone in the house in the afternoon, petrifying nightmares and obscure miseries. A couple of years later, at 11, came boarding school, about which I've decided it's probably better not to speak. 5 years living away from my family, they living in Germany, me flying alone in an aeroplane to England, to an Elizabethan house set in parkland deep in the Shropshire countryside. My first attempt at telling this story covered 15 pages in about a quarter of an hour, and on rereading it, I knew, as Zen folks often say, words would not reach it. Whilst I was there, I discovered the deep solace and nourishment of music. I learned to play the piano and delighted in embarking on the discipline of practice. All my love went into this. Evenings after prep and supper, I would brave the trip away from the dimly lit house, out to the lonely practice huts, where the lights could not be turned on until I reached the very end of the very dark corridors. The early 17th century house was a warren of secret passages and hidden priest holes. Behind enormous portraits, their entrances now bricked up, but still extending underground, under the hill, to emerge in the safety of the local church of Gwynshill. The years in this old house has given me a healthy respect for the reality of ghosts, for our human sensitivity to the karmic fallout of lives unlived. I believe this may be the way ghosts are made. This young girl's psyche could not at the time process the pain of the absences. Untended to, they became presences filled with malevolent intent. And in a real way, it was only the strength of my love for music that got me to the end of those dark corridors and into the experience of connection and intimacy that music has always opened up the way to. A Dharma gate indeed. So not surprising that I found a training and vocation in my adult life that brought together in a very potent meeting the deep afflictions of the human heart and mind and the capacity of music to bring about healing. A full-time postgraduate training at Southlands College in music therapy completely met my wish to dive deeply into the elusive, often mysterious relationship between the human mind and heart, suffering, and the world of music. Not just the world of music, but improvised music, the music that arose in the context of intimate meeting with another, unplanned, unpredictable. The music of improvisation, literally, of not seeing through. I've been privileged over the years to meet young children and adults with profound learning disabilities, language disorders, sensory problems, physical bodily problems, children with no words, adults with no words, finding an entry into the experience of expression, relationship, and shared meaning. Adults whose whole lives have been confined in institutions since they were placed as babies outside of their parents' capacity to care for them. Of elderly folks whose lives have been narrowed down by the onslaught of degenerative diseases of aging, such as Alzheimer's. And for most of my adult professional life, adult people of all ages living on the often far side of a broken connection, the shapes of which we call mental illness. At 16, I emerged from my all-girls boarding school. More accurately, I was asked not to return. Technically and actually, I was expelled. My experience of the tight constraints of being a full-time boarder in a restricted institution, whilst the day girls, mostly the daughters of local farmers, dressed in home clothes after the end of Saturday morning lessons, excitedly planning their weekend adventures. It was too much to bear. I sought life outside the boundaries of the school wall on several wonderful occasions. One of these was reported by concerned local citizens to the headmistress. The event placed me precariously on the outer edges of my family's tolerance, their values and aspirations in keeping with my father's status as an army officer. I would find small ways to rebel, taking a book-filled rucksack to formal mess dinners instead of the modest, appropriately elegant, pearl-covered evening bag my mother would have preferred. Not standing for the Queen before sitting down to eat. Still, the love ran deep and survived my often strident attempts to discover my authentic life as an adult. Expulsion from school turned out to be a great boon, and I landed joyfully in the music department of the then Cambridgeshire College of Arts and Technology. I'd found my place and much flowed easily and happily from the friendships with those who had also found theirs. A time of abundance with formal concerts, performing classes, ad hoc get-togethers, and just playing for hours on end. College, early adulthood, so for hours on end. Early adulthood was the set with hidden leg traps and cases of mistaken identity in the form of romantic longings, deep ones in my case, not surprisingly given the famine years I had just emerged from. I was never attracted to casual liaisons. Relationships were few and long, and in one notable case, too long, way too long. Marrying at 27 a man from Cork with whom I worked at social services in a home for adolescents, I plunged into a painful case of mistaken identity. He was on a collision course with alcohol, and I was on a mission to save him and our marriage. I'm deeply grateful for my 2 years or so in the 12-step program for both Al-Anon, for both the friendship and the tools for accepting the fact that I could only take proper care of my own life and wake up to the unacknowledged ways I was trying to control another's. It gave me the means to accept the reality of the unrelenting fact of alcoholism in his life, and I at last found the resource to let go and moved on. How poignantly that koan, which had appeared to me all those years earlier as "How is it possible to harm those we love?" had been brought to life throughout those hurtful years. In some unaccountable way that brings me to a point almost exactly halfway between my apparent beginning and this apparent present, in 3 months' time I will apparently have reached 60 years of age. 30 years ago, at the apparent age of 30, I discovered and took a deep dive, thirsty deep dive into Buddhist practice. At the time, I was working as a music therapist in Cambridge Mental Health Services and had been in 4 times a week union analysis, which I did for about 4 years. This was giving rise to some rather splendidly archetypal dreamscapes. So 2 or 3 weeks before hearing of and arriving at Cambridge Buddhist Centre, I had a dream that I was in the basement of a house with Buddhist monks in saffron robes. The basement room had an altar in it, and I knew it to be the place I was looking for, and even knew it could be found somewhere. Over the next 6 years or so, I immersed myself in all the forms of practice and events open to me at Cambridge Buddhist Centre, often spending most evenings after work and weekends there. During that time, the Buddhist Centre changed homes 3 times. Each time, the shrine room became bigger and more beautiful. Every time, it was in the basement. This was my first experience of coming home, and I'm still grateful that Amariketu and Ratnaprabha were the Dharmacharis or wayfarers I first set feet on the path of practice with. Now I appreciate the very thorough grounding I had in Buddhist teachings via study groups, study retreats, long meditation retreats, and my own voracious reading. But maybe the brightest jewel of the 3 at the time was Sangha. The friendships and deep sense of fellowship at that time offering glimpses of the possibility of living in a way that put Dharma faring at the heart of my life and full time. Yet the FWBO, now Tri Ratna, was not going to be the right fit for me. I had to recognize the limits to my respect for, and I admit, liking for the founder. Increasingly, the guidance both from him and from senior order members around the relative capacities for practice of men and women, as well as recommendations for intimate relationships, weren't congruent with either my experience or sensibilities, and then I knew it was time to move on. At the time, the Bodhisattva ideal was much talked about at the Buddhist Centre, and populated as it was with many intellectually gifted and energetic young men, the flavour of practice at the centre became quite unbalanced to my mind in favour of the ascetic and heroic. And through my deepening practice and study of psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, I knew idealism could cast long and very dark shadows. In the interests of the well-being of you, dear listeners, the rest of the story needs must be sketched in lightly and briefly. So 6 years at Cambridge Buddhist Centre, followed by 2 or so years with Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings and the Interbeing Sangha. A happy 2 weeks at Plum Village summer opening, which I'd since heard Wendy possibly was at the same one. I don't know. I know Wendy was there too. Then came Gaia House. I don't remember how I came to hear of it, but for the next 7 years or so, I went to as many retreats here as work and commitments to patients would allow. Over the years, I was fortunate to benefit from the teachings of such Dharma luminaries as Stephen and Martin Batchelor, Bhajan Sachito, Joan Halifax, Joseph Goldstein, James Baratz, Rob Bayer, amongst others. It was at Gaia House on a 2-week solitary retreat one winter, my father dying of cancer at home in Cambridge, that the lid of the boarding school trunk was finally opened by the force of the untended furies within. I knew the moment it happened. I had flu and was stepping out of a bath in the wing near the Hermitage. Suddenly there was a slippage of time, and I felt transported to the coldness of the bathroom at the end of the house at boarding school. The correspondence of the two opened the way for the furies to escape. Time and deep faith and the capacity of the human heart to admit and contain the darkest, most annihilating of experiences, and they did seriously threaten annihilation, allowed the furies or hungry ghosts to be fed, satiated, and they eventually moved on. So far, they've never returned. This may be the main gift I've felt able to share with others through all the years of work in the psychiatric hospital and with treasured Sangha friends. Through all the forms and different rituals of a therapy practice, whether music therapy, individual psychotherapy, group therapy, mindfulness-based approaches, student training, clinical supervision, or even the good old full-born hospital Thursday tea dances. This confidence in the capacity of compassionate understanding to reach across the broken connections and bring about healing is the heart of what I know in my own experience to be true. In 2000, I was awarded a training bursary from Addenbrooke's Hospital to go to Massachusetts to undertake the 3-month internship training there at the stress reduction clinic established by John Kabat-Zinn. There's more I would love to tell about this. It was wonderful. And I returned to teach some 8-week mindfulness courses for mental health staff, which were conducted as a pilot with a research analyst. Shortly afterwards, the hospital left its mothership and chaos ensued. Over the years, I taught maybe 5 or 6 more programs, most inside the NHS, but some outside. Again, for therapists, nurses, and psychiatrists. I attended conferences and advanced teacher training retreats over the years, but was troubled by the increasing commodification of mindfulness-based approaches and their appropriation as reproducible techniques. I remember one such occasion at a conference when a psychologist asked John Kabat-Zinn why it should be necessary for health professionals to practice mindfulness themselves, since the program was clearly deliverable without it. Over the years in mental health services, a way of bringing mindfulness and practice into the work of psychotherapy emerged, with folks for whom it was accessible. I gradually lost heart with the direction of the secular mindfulness movement. Back to Gaia House. Although I greatly appreciated the retreats with all of the teachers I'd practiced with there, I knew I was still missing my, in a sense, one true family home. I knew I was ready to commit myself to studying with one teacher and sensed that a lineage and tradition would be important to me. So far, the opportunity had not yet presented itself. In 2004, 14 years ago, I first attended a retreat at Gaia House with Reb. I knew he was my teacher, and here was the family style, as he often called it, that I knew would be the framework for my practice for the rest of my life. Each year he returned to Gaia House, so did I, and connections that grew over the years of those retreats outlasted his visits and have become precious jewels of friendship. Beyond Reb's association with Gaia House was the year that Hebden Bridge Sangha beautifully hosted a retreat with him at the Birchcliff Centre. And the next two times after that were at Felsentor in Switzerland and a few years ago at Crosby, Lancashire. In my second year with Reb, I witnessed the Jukai ceremony of Linda Griffith, and sometime that week I asked Reb to offer me the precepts. After he had said yes, I remember going outside and lying down on the summer lawn under the great plane tree. In some way, it felt like the most complete expression of my life, and I lay down on the earth under the tree, like the boy Gautama under the rose apple tree, like the Buddha to be in the shade of the Bodhi tree, like practitioners through time in the forest of India. As I write this now, a memory of visiting the deer park in Sarnath, India, where the Buddha taught, comes to mind. Always there have been trees, and in some way, this has been the deepest encouragement of the Buddha's way. Next year, in 2006, Devin led me and Alan Wood around the outside of the house at Gaia House to our Jukai ceremony. I'm forever grateful for his wholehearted support. It was a beautiful early summer evening, and I remember Devin's strong chanting helped my distinctly wobbly chanting. Sadly, I never saw Alan Wood again. I don't know if anyone else did. I don't know what happened to him. Listening to Norman Fisher in the early pre-dawn quiet this morning, I heard the following words. What I love most of Dogen's understanding of Buddhism, and this is of course also true of Suzuki Roshi, is his poignant validation of everyday life, including its attachments and tragedies. For Dogen and Suzuki Roshi, ordinary beleaguered human life isn't something to be transcended and overcome with enlightenment. Enlightenment is just to live this sad and tragic life with some joy and understanding. Not to end suffering, but to completely enter suffering and see its beauty. I'm more happy than I can easily say that Ingan is just over the Irish Sea from us, and hope he won't be offended if I express my thanks to COVID for keeping him grounded at home in Ireland. May he remain here for endless ages, so that life in this world does not grow dark. Ingan's generous offerings this year have answered in full measure the deep old longing of my heart for a depth of Sangha friendship and for the real ongoing connection of study and practice with a teacher. Thank you, Ingan, from the bottom of it. Dharma sisters and brothers, old and new, you are much loved. May we always meet like this.